Hey everyone, and welcome back to another installment of Learn to Program. So in the last video we kind of went over some of the more common data types that most computer programming languages use, as well as a quick introduction to using variables. In this video we'll continue our discussion with variables and learn what all we can do with them. This will be a bit of a shorter lesson and not a particularly interesting one, but it does lay some necessary groundwork for the kind of work we'll be doing in upcoming programs. So I will start out by talking about some more operations on values and variables. So as you probably now know, there are plenty of operations we can do on values in Python. We've already seen some examples of doing math such as 2 plus 2 or 18 divided by 6. So you probably figured out that you can do these kinds of operations on variables as well, variables with numeric values. So just to give you a quick example, maybe I'll create a couple of variables here. Maybe num1 equals 5, and then maybe we'll have a second one here equal to 7, and we'll print out the result of num1 plus num2. So we'll go ahead and try running this. So we'll do Python. I've created a new sort of program file, by the way. So this new file is called variables.py. So that's the file we want to be running. So I'll do Python variables.py. And of course it prints out the expected result of adding the variables num1 and num2 together, which is equivalent to 5 plus 7, which is of course 12. So what you may not know is that there are actually operations we can do on non-number values as well, namely strings and characters. So the most common example of this is called string combining, and we'll do a quick example of string combining here. So maybe I'll create a variable here called name again, and I'll set that to my name, and then maybe we'll do a second one here, birthday, and I will set that to whatever my birthday is, which is April 15th. So we're going to try to combine these strings to make a cool little sentence. So we'll do something like print name plus, I don't know, maybe was born on, and then add the birthday variable to it. So that seems pretty straightforward. It might make decent sense. So we'll run this again, and there's our cool little sentence. So basically the computer understands that when you're adding strings together, it can create a longer string. So the value of this variable name is a string that's being added to the value of this string that we, the was born on text that we wrote here, and then as well as the value of the string variable birthday, which is April 15th, and it was able to operate on that and print out this sentence for us. So as you can see, adding strings together is a pretty easy thing to do, but it's important to remember that again it will only work if all the variables are also strings. Otherwise you'll get another error. So let's say I had name is a string, of course, and then I had was born on, but let's say birthday was like an integer or something. That would certainly throw an error. So no matter what operations you're doing on your computer program, all the variables in that operation have to be of the same data type. So this leads me to discuss an important concept called typecasting. So typecasting is an important tool to convert between data types. Certain data types can be expressed as other data types, provided that the computer can handle the conversion. So I'll scrap what I have here to give an example of that. Let's say I had maybe a number that was equal to 2 or something. We would look at that and say, yep, that's definitely an integer value, and the computer would certainly agree with that. But if we wanted to represent that as a string, we'd simply just add our quotation points around it. And again, the computer would read that as a string too. But what if there was a way where we could convert between these integers and strings throughout our program? And there definitely is a way to do that, and that's called typecasting. So I'll bring that back to an integer, and then maybe I'll do something like, maybe I'll create a different thing here called age equals 21, and then maybe I'll try to print out a string combination here. So print I am plus age plus years old. So we'll go ahead and try printing that out. As you can probably guess, this will this will probably throw out an error. So again, we've seen this before. This is familiar to us now that we've done some work on data types, but it cannot combine the string and integer data types. So the way around that is to do typecasting, which if I wanted to convert this age value into a string, I'd simply do str and then enclose that in brackets. So this is a little bit new syntax, but what this str and then brackets thing does for us is it converts the argument, which is age, into a string data type. So this str thing is a built-in function in Python, and we'll talk more about functions in future videos, but essentially it takes an argument and is able to convert it to a string for us. So now we can bypass that sort of incompatible data type issue, if you will, and we'll go ahead and run this again, and now it works great for us. So that's just one example of typecasting, and it's a pretty useful tool to have. I've created kind of a bit of a list here of other forms of typecasting that you'll run into over the course of your programs. So I've just kind of set an integer value of age, an integer value of 0 to this age variable, and we'll kind of go through the list here. So we just did this string one, so of course it'll convert 0 into a quotation 0. This floating function will convert it to a floating point value, which we talked about in the previous video. So instead of 0, you'll get 0.0, for example. And then, as you can probably guess, this int will convert it to an integer. Age is already an integer here, but let's say it wasn't. Let's say it was a string or something. It would then, read out the integer from the string and give you 0 as an integer rather than a string. And then Boolean is a bit of a tricky one. So again, Boolean values, as we talked about in the previous video, are either true or false. And in computer terms, true or false is always represented as 0 or 1. So 0 is always a false value, and 1 is always a true value. So that kind of throws back to binary a little bit. We'll get more into that later for sure. But if you wanted to convert 0 into a Boolean value, this would come out as false. So it's pretty important. Again, the data types have to be compatible. If I were to do something like age equals 20 and then try to convert that to a Boolean value, of course that would throw an error because the computer doesn't know how to convert that. And similarly, if we made an age, it's not really an age, but if we had like a just random text here and we tried to convert that to an integer, again, the computer wouldn't know how to handle that. So basically, it's a good idea to just kind of always think about what you're doing. If it makes sense to you, chances are it'll probably make sense to the computer as well. And if it doesn't make sense to you, chances are you're going to get an error in the computer program. So just something to keep in mind. So one final thing I'd like to talk about is creating new variables from old ones. So it's certainly possible to build variables on top of variables on top of variables. So I'll kind of give a quick example of this. Let's say I had something like, days in week, and set that equal to 7, of course. And then let's say I had another variable here called hours in day, which is of course equal to 24. And then I can create a third variable, maybe let's call it hours in week, and which will be the result of multiplying the variable days in week times the value of the variable hours in day. And so we'll print out the result of that. Oops. So we'll go ahead and save this and run it. And of course we get our nice value of 168, which, if you do the math, that is the expected result. And that's just kind of a quick little thing to illustrate that, it's useful to build variables on top of variables, especially if, these values were constantly changing. You wouldn't have to change it here as well. You could just, call the same variable and it would, do the conversion for you. So that's a pretty useful thing to keep in mind as well. So that pretty much covers our work on basic data types and variables. So I know this really wasn't the most exciting stuff, and it's definitely not the most fun part of programming, but it's certainly fundamental to know this stuff because it's really applicable in pretty much all the programs you'll end up writing. So stick with it, and in the next video we'll do some more exciting things. Specifically we'll be looking at Boolean logic and if statements. So thanks for watching.